The sun was setting over the vast estate in East Africa, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was 1962, and the Hartley mansion stood like a white fortress among the green hills. Inside, servants were busy preparing for a grand dinner party. The master of the house, Thomas Hartley, wanted everything perfect for tonight. His only daughter was finally home. Eleanor had been away for 3 long years studying at a fancy finishing school in London. Now at 22, she had returned with polished manners and expensive dresses. But something in her eyes had changed. Thomas noticed it the moment she stepped off the plane. The dining room glittered with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. British officers, wealthy traders, and colonial administrators filled the room with laughter and conversations about business and politics. Eleanor sat quietly at the table, her mind somewhere far away. She picked at her food, barely listening to the man beside her talking about his tea plantations. Through the large windows, she could see the workers' quarters in the distance. Small lights flickered as families gathered for their evening meals. She could hear faint sounds of singing, the kind that used to comfort her as a child when she would sneak out to listen. Thomas caught her gaze wandering. His jaw tightened. He had worked too hard to build this empire, to earn respect among the colonial society. He would not let his daughter ruin everything with foolish ideas. After the guests left, Thomas called Eleanor into his study. The room smelled of cigars and old leather. Hunting trophies hung on the walls, reminders of his power and control. "Eleanor, I need to speak with you about something important," he began, pouring himself a whiskey. His voice was stern, the same voice he used when conducting business deals. Eleanor stood near the door, her hands folded. "Yes, Father? I've noticed you looking at the workers, watching them from your window. I need you to understand something very clearly." He took a long sip of his drink. "These people are not like us. They never will be. You must maintain proper distance and dignity." Eleanor felt her heart sink. She had hoped London might have changed her father, made him see the world differently. But he was the same man who had punished her as a child for playing with the local children. "They're human beings, Father. They have families, feelings, dreams just like us," Eleanor said softly, knowing it was dangerous to disagree. Thomas slammed his glass on the desk. "Do not speak such nonsense in my house. I've given you the best education, the finest opportunities, and you dare to compare us with savages?" That word, Eleanor hated it. She had heard it all her life, used to describe people who showed her more kindness than most of her father's wealthy friends ever had. "I'm asking you." "No, I'm telling you as your father," Thomas continued, his finger pointing at her. "You shall not love a savage. You will not befriend them. You will not spend unnecessary time with them. You will remember who you are and what family you belong to." Eleanor wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was. But she knew better, so she simply nodded and left the room, her eyes burning with unshed tears. That night she couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, watching the distant fires of the workers' settlement. She could hear drums, the rhythm of life that her father called primitive. But to her it sounded like freedom. Memories flooded back. She remembered being 7 years old, running through the fields with local children. They taught her their language, shared their food, made her flower crowns. She remembered a boy named Kamau, who used to help her climb trees and catch butterflies. They were innocent friendships, pure and simple. Then one day her father found out. He beat the children, threatened their families, and locked Eleanor in her room for a week. He told her those people were dangerous, that she was better than them. She cried for days, not from the punishment, but from losing her friends. Now she was back, and nothing had changed. Her father still ruled with fear and prejudice. The workers still lived in poverty while the Hartleys enjoyed luxury. And she was expected to smile, marry a British officer, and pretend everything was fine. But something inside Eleanor had awakened during her time in London. She had read books about equality and justice. She had heard discussions about independence movements across Africa and Asia. She had seen how wrong colonialism truly was, even if her professors never said it directly. The next morning, Eleanor learned that a new mission school had opened in the nearby town. They needed volunteers to teach English and basic mathematics. The missionaries welcomed anyone who wanted to help, regardless of their background. Eleanor saw an opportunity. If she couldn't change her father, maybe she could do something meaningful with her own hands. Maybe she could make a small difference in a world that seemed so unjust. She decided she would volunteer at that school. It would be her small act of rebellion against her father's cruel worldview. But she knew she had to be careful. If Thomas found out, there would be consequences. As she made her decision, Eleanor looked out at the vast African landscape that stretched beyond her father's estate. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls and rules and prejudices, there was a different world. A world where people were judged by their character, not their skin color. A world where love wasn't forbidden by someone else's hatred. She didn't know it yet, but this decision would change everything. It would lead her to a love so powerful that it would eventually save not just her own soul but her father's life as well. For now, though, she simply whispered a promise to herself in the darkness of her room. "I will not live by your hatred, Father. I will find my own way." Outside, the night sang with the sounds of Africa. The same sounds Thomas called savage were the sounds that made Eleanor feel most alive. And somewhere in those distant lights, a young teacher named Kamau was preparing lessons for tomorrow, not knowing that his life was about to intersect with a young woman who would change everything. The story was just beginning, and neither Thomas nor Eleanor could imagine where it would lead. Love has a way of breaking through the strongest walls, even walls built by years of prejudice and fear. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible conversation with her father. Eleanor had been careful, very careful. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she told the servant she was visiting the church for prayer meetings. Thomas approved of this, thinking religion would keep his daughter properly behaved. But Eleanor wasn't going to church. She was going to the mission school on the other side of town. The school was nothing like the grand buildings she had studied in. It was a simple structure with a tin roof and wooden benches. Children sat on the floor when there weren't enough seats, but their eyes were bright with hunger for knowledge. And that made it more beautiful than any fancy institution Eleanor had ever seen. On her first day, the head missionary, Father Michael, introduced her to the other teachers. Most were local men and women who had managed to get some education and now wanted to pass it on. They welcomed Eleanor warmly, though she could see questions in their eyes. Why would a wealthy British girl want to teach here? Then she met Kamau. He was standing in the corner of the staff room organizing books. He was tall with kind eyes and a gentle smile. When Father Michael introduced them, Kamau shook her hand politely and said, "Welcome. The children will be blessed to learn from you." His English was perfect, his manner confident but not arrogant. Eleanor felt something stir in her chest, though she couldn't name it yet. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I hope I can be helpful." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor threw herself into teaching. She worked with the younger children, teaching them English alphabets and simple words. They were eager students, often staying after class to practice. Their enthusiasm reminded her why education mattered so much. During break times, the teachers would gather under a large acacia tree in the schoolyard. This was where Eleanor got to know Kamau better. She learned that he had gone to India on a scholarship, studied at a university there, and returned to help his community. "Why did you come back?" Eleanor asked one day, genuinely curious. "You could have stayed in India, or gone to England, found better opportunities." Kamau smiled, looking out at the children playing in the yard. "Better opportunities? What could be better than teaching your own people? These children are the future. If I can help even 10 of them read and think for themselves, I've done something meaningful with my life." His words struck Eleanor deeply. Here was a man her father would call a savage, yet he spoke with more wisdom and purpose than any British officer she had ever met. Their conversations became the highlight of her week. They discussed everything from literature to politics, from African history to the changing world around them. Kamau had read Shakespeare and Dickens, but he also taught Eleanor about African philosophers and storytellers she had never heard of. "Your father is Thomas Hartley, isn't he?" Kamau asked one day, his voice careful. Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Yes, how did you know?" "Everyone knows the Hartley estate. Your father is a powerful man." Kamau paused, choosing his words carefully. "Does he know you're teaching here?" "No," Eleanor admitted, looking down at her hands. "He wouldn't approve. He has very fixed ideas about certain things." Kamau nodded slowly. "About people like me, you mean?" Eleanor felt ashamed, but she couldn't lie. "Yes, I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize for your father's beliefs," Kamau said gently. "But I appreciate your honesty. Many people think like him. That's why this work matters. Education changes minds, slowly but surely." Their friendship deepened with each meeting. Eleanor found herself thinking about their conversations long after she returned home. Kamau made her see the world through new eyes. He never spoke with bitterness, despite experiencing discrimination daily. Instead, he talked about hope, about building a better future. One afternoon, Kamau invited Eleanor to attend a community meeting about the upcoming independence celebrations. "It's nothing political," he assured her. "Just families planning a festival. You might enjoy seeing how we celebrate." Eleanor knew she shouldn't go. It was already risky enough coming to the school. But something in her couldn't refuse. She wanted to see more, understand more, be part of something real. The gathering was held in a large clearing with people sitting in circles under the evening sky. Children ran around playing games while women prepared food over open fires. Men discussed plans for the celebration, their voices animated with excitement. Eleanor felt out of place in her expensive dress, but Kamau's mother welcomed her warmly, offering her food and a place to sit. The evening was filled with music, laughter, and stories. Eleanor understood only bits of the local language, but she felt the warmth and community spirit that her father's dinner parties never had. She watched Kamau with his family and neighbors. He was respected, loved, valued. This was not a savage world. This was a world rich with culture, tradition, and human connection. As Kamau walked her back to where she had left her car, they talked under the stars. "Thank you for inviting me," Eleanor said. "It was beautiful." "Thank you for coming," Kamau replied. "Not many people from your background would take that risk." They stopped walking. In the moonlight, Eleanor could see Kamau's face clearly. There was something unspoken between them, something that both excited and terrified her. "Kamau, she started, but didn't know how to continue. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too. But Eleanor, we have to be careful. Your world and mine, they're not supposed to mix." "Maybe they should," Eleanor whispered. Before either could say more, they heard voices. Eleanor's heart jumped. Had someone followed her? She quickly said goodbye and drove away, her hands shaking on the wheel. The next morning, disaster struck. Thomas was waiting for her at breakfast, his face red with anger. "Where were you last night?" he demanded. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I went for a drive, Father. I needed some air." "Don't lie to me." He slammed his fist on the table. "My business associate saw you in the native settlement, with that teacher from the mission school. What are you thinking?" "I was just attending a community event, Father." "There's nothing wrong with that." "Nothing wrong?" Thomas stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "I forbid you to return to that school. I forbid you to see those people again. And I certainly forbid you from seeing that man. He has a name, Father. His name is Kamau, and he's more educated and decent than half your friends." The slap came fast and hard. Eleanor touched her burning cheek, tears springing to her eyes. "You will not speak to me that way," Thomas said coldly. "I've arranged for you to have dinner with Colonel Bradley's son next week. He's a good British officer with a solid future. You will marry someone appropriate, and you will forget this foolish phase." Eleanor looked at her father with a mixture of hurt and defiance. "You can't control who I care about, Father." "We'll see about that," Thomas replied. "You're confined to this house until you come to your senses. And if I hear you've contacted that savage again, I'll make sure he loses more than just his job." Eleanor went to her room, her father's threat ringing in her ears. She knew he meant it. Thomas Hartley had the power to destroy Kamau's life with a single word. But as she lay on her bed, Eleanor realized something important. For the first time in her life, she had found something worth fighting for. Not just Kamau, but what he represented. A world where people were valued for who they were, not what they looked like. A world built on respect, not hate. Her father had given her an ultimatum, but he didn't understand that his daughter had already made her choice. The question now was whether she had the courage to follow through. For 2 weeks, Eleanor was a prisoner in her own home. Thomas had instructed the servants to watch her every move. Her car keys were taken away. The telephone in her room was disconnected. He was determined to break her spirit, to make her forget about the mission school and especially about Kamau. But love, once awakened, is not so easily extinguished. Eleanor found an ally in the most unexpected place. Lucy, the elderly cook who had worked for the family for 30 years, had watched Eleanor grow up. She had seen the lonely child, the confused teenager, and now the young woman struggling to find her voice. One morning, Lucy slipped a folded note into Eleanor's breakfast napkin. It was from Kamau. The message was simple. Are you safe? I'm worried. Please let me know you're okay. Eleanor's heart swelled. He was thinking about her, concerned for her well-being. She quickly wrote back, I'm confined to the house. Father knows everything. Please be careful. Lucy became their secret messenger, carrying notes back and forth. Through these letters, Eleanor and Kamau's connection deepened. They wrote about their hopes, their fears, their dreams for a different kind of world. Kamau wrote about his vision for education, about the independence movement, about building a society based on equality. Eleanor wrote about feeling trapped in a life that wasn't hers, about wanting to make choices that mattered about him. After a month, Thomas decided Eleanor had learned her lesson. He allowed her limited freedom again, but always with a chaperone. The dinner with Colonel Bradley's son was scheduled. Thomas made it clear that he expected an engagement announcement soon. Eleanor went through the motions. She smiled at the young officer, made polite conversation, and counted the minutes until she could leave. The officer was pleasant enough, but he talked only about military strategies and hunting expeditions. He asked nothing about her thoughts, her interests, her dreams. She would be just another trophy wife in colonial society. That night, Eleanor made her decision. She wrote a long letter to Kamau, asking him to meet her at the mission church at dawn. She needed to see him, to talk face to face, no matter the risk. Kamau was waiting when she arrived, concern etched on his face. They sat in the empty church, speaking in hushed voices. Eleanor, this is dangerous for both of us, Kamau said, though his eyes showed he was glad to see her. I know, but I couldn't stay away anymore. Kamau, my father is forcing me to marry someone I don't love, someone I barely know. Kamau took her hand gently. And what do you want? Eleanor looked into his eyes, her voice trembling. I want a life that means something. I want to be with someone who sees me as an equal, who challenges me to be better. She paused, gathering courage. I want to be with you. Kamau's expression was torn between joy and worry. Eleanor, do you understand what you're saying? If we choose this path, you'll lose everything. Your father will disown you. Society will reject you. Your life of comfort will be gone. That life is a golden cage, Eleanor replied firmly. I'd rather be free and poor than wealthy and imprisoned. It won't be easy. I'm a teacher with a modest salary. We'll face discrimination from both sides. Some in my community won't accept you. Your people certainly won't. I know, Eleanor said. But I love you, Kamau. I didn't plan this. I didn't want to fall in love with someone my father would hate. But here we are, and I can't pretend these feelings don't exist. Kamau stood up, walking to the window. The sun was rising, painting the sky in brilliant colors. I love you too, he said quietly. I've loved you since our first real conversation, when you asked me questions no one from your background had ever asked. When you saw me as a person, not as a savage. He turned to face her. But Eleanor, if we do this, there's no going back. Are you absolutely sure? Eleanor stood and walked to him. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They held each other as the morning light filled the church. It was a moment of pure connection, two souls deciding to face the world together despite impossible odds. Over the next weeks, they made their plans carefully. Kamau spoke with the elders in his community, explaining the situation. Some were supportive, understanding that love knows no boundaries. Others were skeptical, worried about bringing the daughter of Thomas Hartley into their midst. He's exploited our people for years, one elder said. How can we trust his daughter? She is not her father, Kamau argued. She's choosing us over him. That speaks volumes. Eleanor, meanwhile, tried one last time to talk to her father. She found him in his study going over business papers. Father, I need to speak with you about something important. Thomas didn't look up. If it's about that native teacher, save your breath. I've already spoken to the mission. He's been dismissed. Eleanor's heart sank. You got him fired? How could you? Quite easily, Thomas said coldly. And that's just the beginning. If you continue this foolishness, I'll make sure he never works anywhere in this region again. I'll destroy him, Eleanor. Don't test me. Why are you so full of hate, Father? Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face. What did these people ever do to you? They exist on my land, benefit from my generosity, and this is how they repay me? By corrupting my daughter? Thomas finally looked at her. You have a choice, Eleanor. Give up this madness, marry properly, and live the life you were meant for, or walk out that door and never come back. Eleanor wiped her tears. Then I'll leave. I choose love over hate, Father. I choose humanity over prejudice. I choose Kamau. Thomas's face turned purple with rage. If you walk out, you're no longer my daughter. You'll be dead to me. You'll inherit nothing. I'll make sure every door in British society is closed to you. Then I'll build a new life, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her own strength. With people who value kindness over cruelty. She walked to the door, then paused. I hope someday you'll understand, Father. I hope someday you'll see what you're choosing to lose. Get out, Thomas roared. And don't ever come back. Eleanor left with only the clothes on her back and a small bag of personal items. Lucy had secretly packed some money and jewelry for her, whispering, You're braver than anyone I've ever known, child. Go and be happy. She went straight to Kamau, who held her as she cried for the father she had lost, even while gaining the freedom she craved. They were married in a traditional ceremony, with Kamau's family and the mission community as witnesses. Eleanor wore simple clothes and flowers in her hair. There were no fancy dresses, no orchestra, no crystal champagne glasses. But there was authentic joy, heartfelt blessings, and love that needed no material decoration. As they danced under the African stars, Eleanor felt truly free for the first time in her life. She had chosen love against all odds. She had walked away from privilege to stand with the man society told her to hate. But the hard part was just beginning. News of the marriage spread like wildfire. Thomas used his influence to make their lives difficult at every turn. Kamau couldn't find work. Landlords refused to rent to them. Shops that served the British community closed their doors when Eleanor entered. They moved into a small room in the mission compound, living on Father Michael's charity, and odd jobs Kamau could find outside Thomas's reach. Eleanor learned to cook on an open fire, to wash clothes by hand, to live without the luxuries she had known all her life. Some days were so hard she wondered if she had made a mistake. But then Kamau would come home, tired from laboring in the fields, and still ask about her day. He still treated her with respect and tenderness. He still believed in their future. And slowly Eleanor found her place in this new world. She started teaching children in the evenings right there in the mission compound. She learned the local language bit by bit. She earned the respect of Kamau's community through her humility and genuine effort to understand their ways. But neither of them knew that the real test was still to come. Thomas, consumed by rage and wounded pride, was plotting something that would push them all to the breaking point. And the world around them was changing too, as independence movements gained strength and the colonial order began to crumble. Love had brought Eleanor and Kamau together. But would it be enough to survive what was coming? 2 years had passed since Eleanor walked out of her father's house. 2 years of struggle, sacrifice, and unexpected joy. She was now 24, her hands rougher, her face more mature, but her spirit stronger than ever. Life had not been easy. The small room in the mission compound was cramped and hot in summer, cold in winter. Money was always tight. Kamau worked various jobs, from construction sites to tutoring children of sympathetic families. Eleanor had found work helping at a medical clinic run by missionaries, assisting with basic care and teaching hygiene to mothers. But they were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. In the evenings, they would sit outside their small room, watching the sunset, talking about their day. Kamau was writing a book about education reform. Eleanor was learning traditional medicine from the elder women in the community. They had built a life based on love, mutual respect, and shared purpose. The community that had once been skeptical of Eleanor now embraced her. She had proven herself not with words but with actions. She carried water from the well like everyone else. She helped harvest crops during planting season. She sat with grieving families and celebrated at weddings. She was no longer Thomas Hartley's daughter. She was simply Eleanor, Kamau's wife, a member of the community. But beyond their small world, things were changing rapidly. Independence was coming. The colonial government was preparing to hand over power. Men like Thomas Hartley, who had built empires on cheap labor and preferential policies, were facing an uncertain future. Thomas had not adjusted well to these changes. His business partners had started leaving the country, taking their capital with them. New regulations favored local businesses over colonial enterprises. His once mighty trading empire was shrinking day by day. But Thomas was too proud to adapt. He refused to partner with local businessmen. He spoke bitterly about the independence movement, making enemies where he should have been building bridges. His friends stopped visiting. His influence evaporated like morning mist. In his mansion, Thomas lived alone except for a skeleton staff. Most of the servants had left, finding better opportunities elsewhere. The grand parties had stopped. The house that once glittered with wealth now felt like a mausoleum, cold and empty. Thomas spent his days in his study, drinking whiskey and nursing his bitterness. He blamed everyone but himself. The independence movement, the new government, the local people he had exploited for decades, and most of all his daughter, whose betrayal he could never forgive. He had burned every photo of Eleanor. He told anyone who asked that his daughter had died. In his twisted mind, she had committed the ultimate sin by choosing love over loyalty to her race and class. But sometimes, late at night when the whiskey made his defenses weak, Thomas would stand at his window looking toward the town. He wondered about Eleanor. Was she still alive? Was she suffering? Did she ever think of him? He would never admit it, but a part of him missed her. She had been his only child, the only person who had ever challenged him, who had inherited his stubborn strength but used it for completely opposite purposes. Then his health started failing. The years of heavy drinking, rich food, stress, and loneliness took their toll. He developed high blood pressure. His hands shook. He had trouble sleeping. But he was too proud to see a doctor, too isolated to ask for help. One evening in late November, Thomas was working in his study when he felt a strange sensation. His left arm went numb. His vision blurred. He tried to stand but couldn't feel his legs. The room spun around him and he collapsed to the floor. He lay there, unable to move, unable to call for help. Hours passed. The servants who remained were in their quarters, too far away to hear. Thomas's mind was alert, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond. Terror gripped him as he realized he might die alone on this floor. Morning came. The elderly cook found him when she arrived to prepare breakfast. She screamed for help, and together with the gardener they managed to get Thomas onto a couch. They sent for the only doctor in the area willing to come, a young man named David who had studied medicine in the capital. David examined Thomas carefully. "He's had a stroke," he told the frightened servants. "A severe one. He needs immediate hospital care, proper nursing, medication." But the nearest hospital equipped to handle such cases was hours away. Thomas was too weak to travel. David did what he could, giving basic treatment, but he knew it wasn't enough. "Does he have any family?" David asked. "Anyone who can care for him?" The cook hesitated, then said quietly, "He has a daughter, but they haven't spoken in 2 years. He disowned her." David's eyes widened. "Eleanor? I know her. She works at the missionary clinic." He paused, thinking, someone needs to tell her. This man needs constant care, and these servants can't provide it. The cook looked worried. "Mr. Hartley made us promise never to contact her. He said if any of us helped her, we'd be fired." "Well," David said grimly, "Mr. Hartley is in no position to fire anyone now. And as a doctor, I have an ethical duty to inform his family. I'll tell her myself." That afternoon, David found Eleanor at the clinic. She was teaching a group of mothers about preventing infant diarrhea, demonstrating proper hand-washing techniques. She looked healthy and content, completely at home in her simple surroundings. "Eleanor, can I speak with you privately?" David asked. They went outside and David explained the situation. "Your father had a stroke. He's partially paralyzed and can barely speak. He's alone except for 2 elderly servants who can't properly care for him. I thought you should know." Eleanor's face went pale. Despite everything, despite all the hurt and rejection, Thomas was still her father. "How bad is it?" "Very bad. Without proper care, he won't survive more than a few weeks. Even with care, his recovery is uncertain." David looked at her kindly. "I'm not telling you what to do. I just thought you had a right to know." Eleanor thanked him and went home in a daze. She found Kamau preparing their evening meal over a small charcoal stove. "Something happened," she said, and told him everything. Kamau's first reaction was anger. "That man made our lives miserable. He got me fired, threatened my family, used his power to hurt us at every turn. He called me a savage and said I wasn't worthy to breathe the same air as him." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "He disowned you. He told you never to come back. He said you were dead to him." Kamau's voice was tight with emotion. "Why should we care what happens to him now?" "Because if we don't, we become like him," Eleanor said, full of hate and bitterness. "He's a broken old man, Kamau. alone and dying. Yes, he did terrible things, but does that mean we should let him suffer? Kamau sat down heavily. You want to help him? I don't know what I want, Eleanor admitted. Part of me wants to walk away, to let him face the consequences of his choices. But another part, he's my father, and I don't want his hatred to poison my heart. I don't want to become cruel because he was cruel. They talked late into the night. Kamau reminded her of all the pain Thomas had caused. Eleanor agreed with every point. But she kept coming back to one question. What kind of person do I want to be? The next day, Eleanor went to see the community elders, including Kamau's uncle, a respected teacher and philosopher. I need your guidance, she told them, explaining the situation. My father is dying. He treated me and all of you terribly, but I'm thinking of going to help him. Am I being foolish? The elders discussed among themselves. Finally, Kamau's uncle spoke. Your father saw us as savages. He thought we were less human because of our skin. He believed we had no values, no dignity, no moral principles. Eleanor nodded sadly. So here is your answer, the elder continued. If you help him, you prove him wrong. You show that the values he rejected, compassion, forgiveness, and humanity, are actually our strength. You show that we are not savages but better people than he ever was. Another elder added, but this is not just your decision. It affects Kamau too. What does your husband say? Kamau, who had been standing quietly, spoke up. I say Eleanor has the biggest heart of anyone I know. If she feels called to help her father, then I support her, even though that man despises me, even though he'd probably rather die than accept my help. He paused, but I won't let her go alone. We're married. We face things together. The elders nodded approvingly. Then you have our blessing. What you're about to do is not easy. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. But it is the right thing, and we honor you for choosing the difficult path of forgiveness. That evening, Eleanor and Kamau stood at the edge of Thomas's estate, looking at the big house on the hill. It looked different now, somewhat run down, less imposing. Just a building, not the fortress it had seemed 2 years ago. Are you ready? Kamau asked, taking Eleanor's hand. No, Eleanor admitted, but let's go anyway. They walked up the long driveway together. Two people who had been forbidden to love now coming to save the man who had forbidden them. Neither knew what reception awaited them or whether Thomas would even accept their help. But they were about to learn that sometimes love doesn't just conquer hate. Sometimes it has the power to transform it completely. The house that Eleanor had once called home felt like a stranger's property. The paint was peeling, the gardens overgrown. Windows that had once sparkled were now clouded with dust. It was as if the building itself had given up, mirroring its owner's decline. The elderly cook, Martha, opened the door. When she saw Eleanor, tears filled her eyes. Oh, child, you came. I didn't think you would after everything. Where is he? Eleanor asked gently. Martha led them to what had been the grand living room. Thomas lay on a couch covered with blankets despite the warm weather. The once powerful man looked shrunken, fragile. His face was slack on one side, his left arm curled uselessly against his chest. His eyes were open but unfocused. When those eyes landed on Eleanor, something flickered in them. Recognition, perhaps, or anger. It was hard to tell. Father, Eleanor said softly, kneeling beside the couch. I heard you were ill. I came to see if I could help. Thomas tried to speak, but only garbled sounds came out. His right hand moved weakly as if trying to wave her away. Then his eyes shifted to Kamau, standing respectfully near the doorway. Thomas's face contorted with what could only be rage. He made more urgent sounds, clearly distressed. Mr. Hartley, I'm Kamau, Kamau said calmly, stepping forward despite Thomas's obvious agitation. I'm Eleanor's husband. We're here to help you if you'll allow it. Thomas's reaction was violent. He thrashed on the couch, knocking blankets to the floor. The sounds he made were desperate, angry. His one working hand reached for a glass on the nearby table, clearly intending to throw it. Eleanor caught his hand gently but firmly. Father, please. You're going to hurt yourself. We're not here to upset you. We're here to help. But Thomas wouldn't calm down. His blood pressure spiked, his face turned red, and he began having difficulty breathing. David, who had been waiting outside, rushed in with his medical bag. Everyone step back, David ordered, working quickly to stabilize Thomas. He administered medication, checked vital signs, and gradually the crisis passed. Thomas lay exhausted, his energy spent. He can't handle this much stress, David said seriously. His condition is very fragile. Any strong emotion could trigger another stroke or worse. Eleanor looked at her father's defeated form. Maybe we shouldn't have come. Our presence is making him worse. No, David said thoughtfully. He needs care, and you're the only family he has. He'll have to get used to it. The question is whether he'd rather accept your help or die alone. Right now, those are his only options. Over the next hours, they assessed the situation. The house was in terrible condition. Bills were unpaid, repairs were needed, and food supplies were running low. Thomas's business accounts were nearly empty. Years of mismanagement and the changing political climate had destroyed his wealth. He's been living on savings for months, Martha explained. But he kept spending foolishly, refusing to adjust. He fired most of the staff but still tried to live like a rich man. Now there's barely enough money to buy food. Eleanor and Kamau looked at each other. They had so little themselves, but they couldn't abandon Thomas to this fate. We'll need to move in, Eleanor said, at least temporarily. He needs round-the-clock care. Martha shook her head sadly. He won't want that, Miss Eleanor. Especially not with your husband. You saw how he reacted. He doesn't have a choice, Kamau said firmly but without anger. This isn't about what he wants. It's about what he needs. They spent that first night in Eleanor's old room, which had been left exactly as it was the day she left. Her books were still on the shelf, her childhood toys in the corner. It felt like walking into a museum of her past life. I can't believe I'm back here, Eleanor said, sitting on her old bed. I never thought I'd see this room again. Kamau stood by the window looking out at the estate. This is harder than I thought it would be. Being in this house, knowing how he feels about me, about us. Eleanor went to him, taking his hand. We don't have to stay. We can find another way. No, Kamau said. We started this, we'll see it through. But Eleanor, I need you to understand something. I can forgive your father for how he treated me, but I'll never forget how he treated you, how he disowned his own daughter for choosing love. That's the part I struggle with. The next morning, they established a routine. David came early to check on Thomas and teach them proper care techniques. Thomas needed help with everything. Eating, bathing, using the bathroom, taking medications. It was humbling work, intimate and difficult. Eleanor handled most of the personal care, but Kamau did everything else. He fixed broken pipes, repaired the roof, tended the neglected garden. He was trying to stay busy, to be useful, perhaps to avoid direct confrontation with Thomas. But gradually, Kamau had to help with Thomas's care too. Eleanor couldn't lift him alone. The first time Kamau had to help move Thomas from the couch to his bed, the old man's eyes filled with tears of humiliation and rage. I know you don't want my help, Mr. Hartley, Kamau said quietly as they settled Thomas into bed. But right now you need it. I'm not doing this to shame you. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Thomas turned his face away, unable to respond, unable to escape. Days turned into weeks. Word spread through the community about what was happening. Some people from the mission brought food. Kamau's mother sent traditional medicines. The elders came to visit, offering prayers and support. Thomas was forced to watch as the people he had called savages showed more compassion than his wealthy British friends ever had. Not one of his old associates came to visit. Not one sent a message asking about his health. They had all disappeared when his money ran out. One evening, Eleanor was reading in Thomas's room while he slept. Suddenly, he made a sound. She looked up to find him awake, tears running down his face. Father, are you in pain? Should I call David? Thomas shook his head weakly. He struggled to form words and finally managed a broken whisper. Why? Eleanor understood. Why are we here? Why are we helping you? He nodded slightly. Eleanor set down her book and moved closer. Because you're my father. Because despite everything, I still love you. And because Kamau is a better man than you ever gave him credit for. He's teaching me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to let hate win. Thomas closed his eyes, more tears escaping. For the first time since his stroke, he seemed not angry but broken. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crack, but full transformation was still far away. Thomas still flinched when Kamau entered the room. He still refused to look directly at his son-in-law. He took the care he needed but gave nothing back, no gratitude, no softening of his rigid prejudices. Late one night, Eleanor found Kamau sitting outside under the stars, his head in his hands. What's wrong? She asked, sitting beside him. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Kamau admitted. Every day I help a man who despises me. Every day I see the disgust in his eyes when I touch him. Eleanor, I'm trying to be strong, but it's breaking something inside me. Eleanor held him while he cried, this strong, dignified man finally releasing the pain he'd been carrying. We can leave, she said. We can hire someone else to care for him. We've done enough. No, Kamau said, wiping his eyes. If we leave now, nothing changes. He'll die hating us and we'll always wonder if we could have made a difference. I just needed to let out this frustration. Tomorrow I'll be strong again, and he was. Every morning Kamau got up and cared for the man who wished him dead. Every day he showed dignity and compassion in the face of contempt. He was proving, action by action, day by day, that Thomas's entire worldview was wrong. Thomas, trapped in his broken body, had no choice but to watch and slowly, painfully, begin to understand what real strength looked like. It didn't look like domination or wealth or power over others. It looked like a man called a savage showing grace to someone who had shown him none. The collapse of Thomas's empire had brought him to this moment. Now came the harder part, the collapse of his pride, his prejudice, and everything he thought he knew about the world. Eleanor decided to give her father 1 more month. 1 month for Thomas to prove his words meant something. 1 month before they would leave for the capital and start their new life. But she set conditions. She sat with Thomas and explained clearly, Father, if we stay, things have to change. You need to treat Kamau with respect, not as a servant, not as someone beneath you, but as my husband and a good man. If you can't do that, we're leaving. Thomas nodded slowly. I try, he managed to say. The change started small. The next morning, when Kamau came to help Thomas out of bed, the old man looked at him directly for the first time and said, Thank you. Kamau was so surprised he nearly dropped the cane. You're welcome, Mr. Hartley. Thomas, the old man corrected. Call me Thomas. It was a tiny gesture, but it meant everything. First names were personal, equal. It was an offering of respect. Over the following days, Thomas made more efforts. When Kamau brought him meals, Thomas would try to make eye contact and nod gratefully. When they sat together during exercises David had prescribed, Thomas would attempt small talk, asking about Kamau's day or commenting on the weather. The conversations were awkward and halting. Thomas's speech was still affected by the stroke, and Kamau was cautious, not sure if this change was real or temporary. But they were trying, both of them. Eleanor watched these interactions with cautious hope. But the real test came when Kamau's family wanted to visit to perform a traditional blessing for Eleanor's pregnancy. They want to come here? Thomas asked when Eleanor told him. Yes. It's important to Kamau's culture. They bless the mother and baby, pray for safe delivery, and celebrate the new life. It would mean a lot to us. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally, he said, Your house, too. They welcome. Eleanor hugged him carefully, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Father. The blessing ceremony took place in the garden on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. About 20 people came, including Kamau's mother, his uncles and aunts, the community elders, and some of the children from the school where they used to teach. They brought traditional foods, prepared special herbs, and sang songs in their language. Eleanor sat in a special chair decorated with flowers while the elder women blessed her belly and prayed for the baby. Kamau stood beside her, proud and emotional. Thomas watched from his wheelchair on the veranda. Martha had helped him dress in clean clothes and positioned him where he could see everything. His face was complex, showing curiosity, discomfort, wonder, and something that might have been regret. Halfway through the ceremony, Kamau's mother noticed Thomas sitting alone. She said something to the other women, and they nodded. Then she walked up to the veranda with a plate of food. You eat, she said, offering it to him. Bless baby, too. You, grandfather. Thomas took the plate with shaking hands. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Then, to everyone's surprise, Kamau's mother gestured for someone to help move Thomas's wheelchair closer to the ceremony. 2 young men carefully brought him down the ramp and positioned him near Eleanor. Family, Kamau's mother said firmly, pointing at Thomas, then at Eleanor, then at her own son. All family now. The elder who was leading the ceremony included Thomas in the blessings. He prayed in his language, then translated for Thomas's benefit. We pray this child brings healing. We pray this child builds bridges. We pray this child knows love from all family. Thomas bowed his head, tears flowing freely down his weathered face. These people he had despised, exploited, and called savages were treating him with more grace than he had ever shown anyone. After the ceremony, people came to greet Thomas. They shook his hand, spoke to him kindly, and included him in conversations. They didn't mention the past or his cruelty. They simply treated him as Eleanor's father and welcomed him into their circle. That evening, after everyone had left, Thomas asked to speak with Kamau privately. Eleanor was nervous but stayed nearby in case she was needed. The two men sat in the library, the room dim in the evening light. Thomas had asked Martha to help him prepare tea, a gesture of hospitality he had never offered Kamau before. "I need to say something," Thomas began, struggling with each word. "It's hard." "Take your time," Kamau said gently. Thomas took a deep breath. "I was wrong about you, about your people, about everything." He paused, gathering strength. "I called you savage, but I was savage, cruel, blind." Kamau listened without interrupting. "You care for me, feed me, wash me, help me live." Thomas's voice cracked. "Why, after what I did?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Kamau answered simply. "And because I love your daughter. Her heart would break if we abandoned you. I don't deserve this kindness." "No," Kamau agreed honestly. "You don't, but grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than the hurt we've experienced." Thomas nodded slowly, crying openly now. "I'm sorry, so sorry for all I did, to you, to Eleanor, to everyone." "I hear you," Kamau said, "and I believe you mean it. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. I can forgive you, and I do, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You hurt a lot of people over many years. Some of them may never forgive you, and that's their right." "I know," Thomas whispered. "But here's what I can offer," Kamau continued. "A fresh start between us. For Eleanor's sake, for the baby's sake, and honestly for your sake. You're an old man with a second chance at life. Don't waste it." Thomas reached out his shaking hand. Kamau took it, and they shook. Two men who had been enemies now trying to find peace. From that day forward, something shifted in the house. Thomas became genuinely engaged with his recovery. He worked harder at his physical therapy, determined to be mobile enough to hold his grandchild when it arrived. He started asking Kamau questions about his culture, his education, his dreams. He listened, really listened, for the first time in his life. He was learning that the world was much bigger and more complex than his limited, prejudiced view had allowed. Kamau began teaching Thomas basic phrases in his language. Thomas was a slow learner, his stroke making it difficult, but he persisted. When he managed his first complete sentence, thanking someone in their native tongue, the pride on his face was childlike. Eleanor watched these changes with growing amazement. Her father was becoming someone she had never known, someone humble, curious, and genuinely remorseful. But the most significant change came one morning when David arrived for Thomas's weekly checkup. After examining him, David said, "Thomas, your recovery is remarkable. Much better than I expected. At this rate, you'll be walking without a cane in a few months." Thomas smiled, but then turned serious. "David, I need favor. What is it? The mission school still there?" "Yes, though it struggles without proper funding." Thomas nodded. "I have the money. Not much, but some. I want to give. For school. For teachers. For children." David looked surprised. "That's very generous." "Not generous," Thomas corrected. "Necessary payment. For my crimes." Word spread quickly about Thomas's donation. It wasn't enough to save the school completely, but it was a start. More importantly, it was symbolic. Thomas Hartley, who had once tried to close the school, was now supporting it. Kamau's community didn't know how to react at first. Some were skeptical, viewing it as too little, too late. Others saw it as genuine repentance and accepted it graciously. The community elders came to visit Thomas. They sat with him, and the eldest spoke. "Mr. Thomas, we know you're trying to change. We see it. But changing yourself is only the first step. The real question is, will you help change the system you benefited from?" Thomas listened carefully, then nodded. "Tell me, how?" They talked for hours about education, land rights, fair business practices, and building true equality. Thomas couldn't undo his past, but he could use his knowledge and remaining influence to help build a better future. As the weeks passed, Eleanor's belly grew rounder. Thomas would sit with her in the evenings, sometimes placing his hand gently on her stomach to feel the baby kick. The walls between them had finally come down. "I missed so much," Thomas said one evening. 2 years of your life. Your wedding, your struggles, all because of my pride. But you're here now, Eleanor said. That's what matters. Our child will know their grandfather, not the angry, bitter man you were, but the man you're becoming. Thomas looked at his daughter with love and regret mixing in his eyes. That man died. Good riddance. This man is better. Thanks to the savage. He smiled when he said the word, turning it into something affectionate rather than hateful. It was his way of acknowledging how wrong he had been. Kamau, hearing this from the doorway, smiled too. The savage had indeed shown grace, the kind of grace that not only spares a life but transforms it completely. And the transformation was far from over. Eleanor decided to give her father 1 more month. 1 month for Thomas to prove his words meant something. 1 month before they would leave for the capital and start their new life. But she set conditions. She sat with Thomas and explained clearly, "Father, if we stay, things have to change. You need to treat Kamau with respect, not as a servant, not as someone beneath you, but as my husband and a good man. If you can't do that, we're leaving." Thomas nodded slowly. "I try," he managed to say. The change started small. The next morning, when Kamau came to help Thomas out of bed, the old man looked at him directly for the first time and said, "Thank you." Kamau was so surprised he nearly dropped the cane. "You're welcome, Mr. Hartley." "Thomas," the old man corrected. "Call me Thomas." It was a tiny gesture, but it meant everything. First names were personal, equal. It was an offering of respect. Over the following days, Thomas made more efforts. When Kamau brought him meals, Thomas would try to make eye contact and nod gratefully. When they sat together during exercises David had prescribed, Thomas would attempt small talk, asking about Kamau's day or commenting on the weather. The conversations were awkward and halting. Thomas's speech was still affected by the stroke, and Kamau was cautious, not sure if this change was real or temporary. But they were trying, both of them. Eleanor watched these interactions with cautious hope. But the real test came when Kamau's family wanted to visit to perform a traditional blessing for Eleanor's pregnancy. "They want to come here?" Thomas asked when Eleanor told him. "Yes, it's important to Kamau's culture. They bless the mother and baby, pray for safe delivery, and celebrate the new life. It would mean a lot to us." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally he said, "Your house too, they welcome." Eleanor hugged him carefully, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Father." The blessing ceremony took place in the garden on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. About 20 people came, including Kamau's mother, his uncles and aunts, the community elders, and some of the children from the school where they used to teach. They brought traditional foods, prepared special herbs, and sang songs in their language. Eleanor sat in a special chair decorated with flowers, while the elder women blessed her belly and prayed for the baby. Kamau stood beside her, proud and emotional. Thomas watched from his wheelchair on the veranda. Martha had helped him dress in clean clothes and positioned him where he could see everything. His face was complex, showing curiosity, discomfort, wonder, and something that might have been regret. Halfway through the ceremony, Kamau's mother noticed Thomas sitting alone. She said something to the other women and they nodded. Then she walked up to the veranda with a plate of food. "You eat," she said, offering it to him. "Bless baby too." "You grandfather." Thomas took the plate with shaking hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. Then, to everyone's surprise, Kamau's mother gestured for someone to help move Thomas's wheelchair closer to the ceremony. 2 young men carefully brought him down the ramp and positioned him near Eleanor. "Family," Kamau's mother said firmly, pointing at Thomas, then at Eleanor, then at her own son. "All family now." The elder who was leading the ceremony included Thomas in the blessings. He prayed in his language, then translated for Thomas's benefit. "We pray this child brings healing. We pray this child builds bridges. We pray this child knows love from all family." Thomas bowed his head, tears flowing freely down his weathered face. These people he had despised, exploited, and called savages were treating him with more grace than he had ever shown anyone. After the ceremony, people came to greet Thomas. They shook his hand, spoke to him kindly, and included him in conversations. They didn't mention the past or his cruelty. They simply treated him as Eleanor's father and welcomed him into their circle. That evening, after everyone had left, Thomas asked to speak with Kamau privately. Eleanor was nervous but stayed nearby in case she was needed. The two men sat in the library, the room dim in the evening light. Thomas had asked Martha to help him prepare tea, a gesture of hospitality he had never offered Kamau before. "I need to say something," Thomas began, struggling with each word. "It's hard." "Take your time," Kamau said gently. Thomas took a deep breath. "I was wrong about you, about your people, about everything." He paused, gathering strength. "I called you savage, but I was savage, cruel, blind." Kamau listened without interrupting. "You care for me, feed me, wash me, help me live." Thomas's voice cracked. "Why after what I did?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Kamau answered simply. "And because I love your daughter. Her heart would break if we abandoned you. I don't deserve this kindness." "No," Kamau agreed honestly. "You don't, but grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to be better than the hurt we've experienced." Thomas nodded slowly, crying openly now. "I'm sorry, so sorry, for all I did to you, to Eleanor, to everyone." "I hear you," Kamau said, "and I believe you mean it. But Thomas, I need you to understand something. I can forgive you, and I do. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You hurt a lot of people over many years. Some of them may never forgive you, and that's their right." "I know," Thomas whispered. "But here's what I can offer," Kamau continued. "A fresh start between us. For Eleanor's sake, for the baby's sake, and honestly, for your sake. You're an old man with a second chance at life. Don't waste it." Thomas reached out his shaking hand. Kamau took it, and they shook. Two men who had been enemies now trying to find peace. From that day forward, something shifted in the house. Thomas became genuinely engaged with his recovery. He worked harder at his physical therapy, determined to be mobile enough to hold his grandchild when it arrived. He started asking Kamau questions about his culture, his education, his dreams. He listened, really listened for the first time in his life. He was learning that the world was much bigger and more complex than his limited, prejudiced view had allowed. Kamau began teaching Thomas basic phrases in his language. Thomas was a slow learner, his stroke making it difficult, but he persisted. When he managed his first complete sentence, thanking someone in their native tongue, the pride on his face was childlike. Eleanor watched these changes with growing amazement. Her father was becoming someone she had never known, someone humble, curious, and genuinely remorseful. But the most significant change came one morning when David arrived for Thomas's weekly checkup. After examining him, David said, "Thomas, your recovery is remarkable. Much better than I expected. At this rate, you'll be walking without a cane in a few months." Thomas smiled, but then turned serious. "David, I need favor." "What is it?" "The mission school still there?" "Yes, though it struggles without proper funding." Thomas nodded. "I have money, not much, but some. I want to give. For school, for teachers, for children." David looked surprised. "That's very generous." "Not generous," Thomas corrected. "Necessary payment. For my crimes." Word spread quickly about Thomas's donation. It wasn't enough to save the school completely, but it was a start. More importantly, it was symbolic. Thomas Hartley, who had once tried to close the school, was now supporting it. Kamau's community didn't know how to react at first. Some were skeptical, viewing it as too little, too late. Others saw it as genuine repentance and accepted it graciously. The community elders came to visit Thomas. They sat with him and the elders spoke. "Mr. Thomas, we know you're trying to change. We see it. But changing yourself is only the first step. The real question is, will you help change the system you benefited from?" Thomas listened carefully, then nodded. "Tell me, how?" They talked for hours about education, land rights, fair business practices, and building true equality. Thomas couldn't undo his past, but he could use his knowledge and remaining influence to help build a better future. As the weeks passed, Eleanor's belly grew rounder. Thomas would sit with her in the evenings, sometimes placing his hand gently on her stomach to feel the baby kick. The walls between them had finally come down. "I missed so much," Thomas said one evening. 2 years of your life. Your wedding. Your struggles, all because of my Pride. But you're here now, Eleanor said. That's what matters. Our child will know their grandfather. Not the angry, bitter man you were, but the man you're becoming. Thomas looked at his daughter with love and regret mixing in his eyes. That man died. Good riddance. This man is better, thanks to the savage. He smiled when he said the word, turning it into something affectionate rather than hateful. It was his way of acknowledging how wrong he had been. Kamau, hearing this from the doorway, smiled too. The savage had indeed shown grace, the kind of grace that not only spares a life but transforms it completely. And the transformation was far from over. 6 months had passed since that first awkward handshake between Thomas and Kamau. 6 months of slow healing, careful trust building, and genuine change. Now Eleanor was in her final weeks of pregnancy, and the entire household buzzed with anticipation. Thomas had made remarkable progress. He could walk with only a slight limp. His speech was almost normal and his mind was sharper than ever. But more importantly, his heart had transformed completely. He spent his mornings reading books Kamau recommended, learning about African history, colonial injustice, and independence movements. He wrote letters to government officials, advocating for educational funding and fair business practices. He was trying to use whatever influence he had left for good rather than exploitation. In the afternoons, Thomas would sit in the garden with whoever came to visit. The house that had once been a symbol of colonial isolation was now a gathering place. Teachers from the mission school came to discuss curriculum. Local farmers came to ask for advice on business matters. Children played in the garden while their parents talked with the old man who had once been their oppressor. Thomas had started learning traditional instruments. His fingers were still stiff from the stroke, but he practiced daily on a simple drum, trying to master the rhythms Kamau's uncle taught him. He often made mistakes and everyone would laugh, including Thomas himself. How times change, Martha said one day, watching Thomas laugh with a group of local children who were teaching him a traditional game. I never thought I'd see this. Neither did I, Eleanor admitted, her hand on her enormous belly. But here we are. The baby was due any day now. Kamau had arranged for the best midwife in the region, a woman named Nala who had delivered hundreds of babies. She came to check on Eleanor regularly, bringing herbs and instructions. This baby is strong, Nala said during one visit. I feel it. But the birth will come soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. She was right. That very night, Eleanor woke to strong contractions. Kamau jumped up immediately, calling for Nala while helping Eleanor breathe through the pain. Thomas, hearing the commotion, came to Eleanor's door. What can I do? He asked, no longer the commanding patriarch, but a concerned father. Pray, Father, Eleanor said between contractions. Just pray. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor worked through the night and into the next day. Kamau stayed beside her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, speaking words of encouragement. Nala guided her expertly through each stage. Thomas paced in the hallway, more nervous than he had been in his entire life. Kamau's mother arrived and sat with him, offering quiet comfort despite their language barrier. She simply held his hand and nodded, a grandmother understanding a grandfather's worry. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry filled the house. Strong, healthy, and absolutely perfect, Eleanor collapsed back on the pillows, exhausted but radiant. A boy, Nala announced, placing the cleaned and wrapped baby in Eleanor's arms. A beautiful, healthy boy. Kamau looked at his son with tears streaming down his face. He's perfect. You did it, Eleanor. He's perfect. After Eleanor had rested and the baby was fed, they called Thomas into the room. The old man walked in slowly, his eyes already wet with tears. When he saw his daughter holding his grandson, he broke down completely. Come meet your grandfather, Eleanor said softly. Thomas approached carefully, as if the baby might break. Eleanor placed the infant in his arms and Thomas stood frozen, looking down at the tiny face. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your grandfather. And I promise you something. I promise you'll grow up in a better world than the one I helped create. A world of love, not hate. Of unity, not division. The baby opened his eyes, seeming to look directly at Thomas, and something in the old man's heart broke open completely. He saw the future in that tiny face. A future where his grandson would never think of anyone as a savage, never judge by skin color, never build walls between people. What will you name him? Thomas asked, looking up at Eleanor and Kamau. Kamau and Eleanor exchanged glances. They had discussed this. We're going to call him Amani Thomas, Kamau said. Amani means peace in our language. And Thomas, well, that's for you, for the man you've become. Thomas could hardly speak. You would name him after me? After everything? Not after who you were, Eleanor said. After who you've become. After the man who chose to change, to grow, to love despite fear. Thomas handed the baby back to Eleanor and sat down heavily in a chair, overcome with emotion. All the years of hate, all the cruelty, all the wasted time, they had led to this moment. A moment of pure grace and redemption. 3 days later, they held a traditional naming ceremony in the garden. Both of Kamau's community and a few of Thomas's old associates who had gradually returned were present. It was a beautiful blend of cultures, traditions, and people who never would have mixed in the old days. The elder who had challenged Thomas months ago performed the ceremony. He blessed baby Amani, praying for his future. Then, surprisingly, he called Thomas forward. Thomas Hartley, the elder said in English so everyone could understand. You have walked a long journey, from oppressor to grandfather, from enemy to friend. Your transformation teaches us that no one is beyond redemption if they're willing to change. He placed his hand on Thomas's head in blessing. May you continue to walk in this new path. May you teach your grandson about justice and equality. And may your life be a testimony that love always triumphs over hate. Thomas, standing there being blessed by a man whose people he had oppressed, felt a resurrection happening in his soul. He was truly alive for the first time in his 70 years. After the ceremony, people gathered to eat, talk, and celebrate. Thomas sat with Kamau's uncles, attempting conversation in their language, making them laugh with his mistakes but earning their respect for trying. Colonel Bradley's son, the man Thomas had wanted Eleanor to marry, came to pay respects. He looked at Eleanor with Kamau and their baby, seeing the genuine happiness radiating from them. You made the right choice, he told Eleanor quietly. I can see that now. Thomas overheard this and approached the young officer. She did. And I was wrong to try to force something else. Love cannot be commanded or controlled. It simply is. In the weeks that followed, Thomas threw himself into his new purpose with the same intensity he had once used for building his business empire. But now, instead of exploiting, he was restoring. He worked with Kamau to expand the mission school, using his business knowledge to create sustainable funding. He reached out to his old contacts in England, not for personal gain but to establish scholarship programs for local students. He wrote articles for newspapers about the need for reconciliation and justice in the new independent nation. Some people praised him. Others said it was too little, too late. Thomas accepted both reactions with humility. I can't change the past, he told one skeptical journalist. I can only try to build a better future. And if people never forgive me, I understand. But that won't stop me from doing what's right now. Baby Amani grew quickly, a chubby, happy infant who seemed to bring light wherever he went. Thomas was a devoted grandfather. He would sit for hours just watching the baby sleep or making silly faces to earn a smile. One afternoon, Eleanor found her father in the nursery, holding Amani and singing a lullaby. But it wasn't an English lullaby. It was one of the traditional songs from Kamau's culture that Thomas had learned. Father, Eleanor said softly, not wanting to interrupt but deeply moved. Thomas looked up, smiling. He likes this song. It calms him down. Eleanor sat beside them. I'm proud of you, Father. So proud of who you've become. I'm not proud, Thomas said honestly. I'm grateful. Grateful that you and Kamau didn't give up on me. Grateful that I got a second chance. Grateful for this little one who will never know the bitter, hateful man I used to be. He looked at his daughter seriously. Eleanor, you were right to defy me. You were right to choose love over my commands. If you had listened to me, we would have all lost. I would have died alone and angry. You would have been miserable in a loveless marriage, and this beautiful child wouldn't exist. Your father swore I shall not love a savage, Eleanor quoted his old words, but with a gentle smile. But that love saved your life, Father. It brought you back from a death worse than physical, the death of the soul. Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes again. He cried easily these days. All the emotions he had suppressed for decades now flowing freely. Kamau is the best man I've ever known. And you, my daughter, are braver than any soldier I served with. You fought against hate with love, and you won. As the months passed, Thomas's health continued to improve. He was walking long distances now, often going into town to visit the school or attend community meetings. People who had once feared him now greeted him warmly in the streets. The mission school flourished with his support. Kamau became the headmaster, implementing innovative teaching methods he had learned in India and developed through experience. Eleanor taught part-time, bringing Amani with her to classes where students doted on the baby. Thomas used his remaining wealth wisely. He established a trust fund for the school, ensuring it would continue after he was gone. He donated land he owned to local farmers who had worked it for years but never owned it. He funded medical clinics and community centers,